Give me a nod when you're ready. Shooter's ready. Stand by.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Bullets and Bourbon. I'm Matt Gundlach, and my guest co-host is my friend Brittany Long. Before I go into introducing my guest, I just wanted to put out there that I'm still planning on sticking to my break. I don't intend on recording until the new year after hunting season. This break has allowed me to just relax, recuperate, and recharge. I've been planning this episode for a while, and it's a subject that is near and dear to my heart. Tonight, we have the author of the book, Odysseus and the Oron, Adam Majors. He's a psychotherapist by trade, an Iraq war vet, and notably someone who has walked through our shoes not only as a veteran, but a combat vet. Before I go any further, Adam, can you go ahead and give yourself an introduction?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on, Matt and Brittany, and I appreciate the opportunity just to talk with you guys. So, like you said, I'm an Iraq war veteran, and I'm a psychotherapist today. I spend about half my time working for a nonprofit called The Battle Within, where I'm the clinical manager. So we've got a couple different programs for veterans and first responders, and it's my job just to help folks get in those programs and to make sure that our organization's doing all the things that we have to do just as therapists, to check the boxes and make sure that we're providing the best quality of services that we can. And then I spend the other half of my time in private practice. So basically just doing psychotherapy, working with people one-on-one and helping them with whatever they have going on. And I'm also a husband and a father. I got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old that keep me busy and on my toes. And but that's me in a nutshell.
Hell yeah. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I've been excited for this episode for a while, and we finally got everything to work out to where we can bring you on. But you served in the U.S. Army, and I got to ask, what were your original inclinations to join, and do you perceive that you accomplished and experienced everything that you set out to achieve while serving?
Yeah, so I've wanted to join the military for as long as I can remember. I mean, I remember being like 3 or 4 years old and my mom pulling out her sea bag. She was in the Navy, and seeing a bunch of the stuff she had in there. And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I mean, I remember learning that she was in the Navy and just thinking that was awesome. And at the same time, she made me aware of like all my other family members that had served, uh, my grandparents. I have 4 grandpas because my parents were divorced and remarried. But yeah, one of them was served stateside in World War II. One of them served, in the Marine Corps as an infantryman up until Vietnam started. And then another grandfather was a Marine Corps tanker and served in Korea. And then another fought in Korea and Vietnam. He was a combat medic. And so, all 4 of them were a huge inspiration, but also it was just already in me. So I wouldn't even say my family or their service necessarily was a reason I joined. But I mean, I remember just craving the fantasy of being in the military. I remember running around my grandparents' farm, pretending I was in the military, imagining that I was at war somewhere. Watching, military movies or war movies, from like the age of 4 or 5 on. I remember watching Glory when I was like, in kindergarten, or Memphis Belle, when I was
Yes.
like first grade.
Memphis Belle was a classic. I loved that movie growing up.
It's an incredible story, I mean, it's just, but that's the stuff, right? So, I thought all those movies were great. And, for me, it was just, I couldn't wait until I was old enough to serve my country. But to answer the second part of your question, I would say no, I did not. I did not, get to do everything I wanted to do. I didn't really feel fulfilled when it was over. I was a combat medic and I spent 6 of my 8 years with sapper companies, so combat engineers. But then I spent 2 years with medical companies. And my last like year-ish was with a medical unit. And I was actually hoping that was like a pit stop as an E5 because, and for me, when you're E4 and below, you're usually, um, at least in my role, I was a line medic, in this
Yep.
combat engineer units, but there's not an E5 slot.
Yep.
So you have to go back to a medical unit. And then if you're lucky, you get to come back to a combat unit as an E6. And that's what I was wanting to do. So I went to Iraq uh, uh, with the sapper company. It served in Baghdad, getting bombs off the road, doing route clearance. I was living the dream. It's like life couldn't have been better than that for me. But I also got messed up bad. So I mean, psychologically, I was tortured, on a daily basis up in the Battle of Sadr City. I mean, it was just
Okay.
absolute hell, and nobody walked out of that feeling the same ever again, I don't think.
My
And so,
brother was there in Solder City as well. And this, I think, I want to say it was around late 2005, early 2006 timeframe.
yeah, very rough place to be. I mean, and granted, I worked all over Baghdad, and so I saw a lot of like the typical Baghdad shenanigans. But Battle of Sadr City is absolutely next level. I mean, so I came out of that just barely functioning, having panic attacks all the time. And my goal was to get better and be able to redeploy with my old unit again as a staff sergeant. And so that's what I was aiming for. I still had a lot of ambitions. I wanted to go to all like the HUA schools, is what we call them in the Army, airborne, air assault, sapper school. I wanted to do all that stuff. Um, I wanted to be in for a career. Like for me, I was really just getting started, is how I saw it. But then when the panic attacks started and didn't stop, and when I, went to therapy and I tried to get better and I wasn't getting better, um, it wasn't long before I was forced to reckon with the fact that like it was not going to work out for me the way I planned. And I got a call from my old unit, um, not long before they went to Afghanistan, and they're like, "Hey, you're, number one on the list for promotion. We'd like to offer you the E6 slot. Would you like to go back with us?" And I remember being like legitimately brokenhearted. It was such a shitty position to be in, because I like had to wrestle with this, like, yeah, I want to go. There's a huge part of me that wants to go, that will feel ashamed if I don't go. But then I just had to be honest and like, I can't even go to this, I can't even go to the store without having a panic attack right now. How am I going to go to Afghanistan and look for bombs?
Yep.
And so I had to just tell him, I was like, I'm not doing so good, and I don't think I could do it. And that was pretty much the end of it. So I think within like, I don't know, I think like within 6 or 8 months of that, I was out of the Army.
Wow.
Yeah.
And, and not to really highlight the lack of support you get when getting out, but the military in general does a really good job at transitioning you into the military and putting you into that combat mindset and teaching you how to kill and do those things. But it doesn't do a good job at transitioning you out
Yeah.
from transition readiness, seminars to just making sure you're mentally healthy to get out.
Yeah.
And not to go down a rabbit hole, but I have a good friend who went through the same thing. He extended to go on a deployment with us, deployed, and within a month of getting out of getting back from deployment, he was out of the Marine Corps. No
Yeah.
support structure, no nothing. He is back home in Georgia with his family and folks, and he spiraled. Is he
Yeah.
doing better now? Absolutely. He is in a much better place, but I mean, it lasted. I was down at his house every weekend in Georgia, driving from Camp Lejeune pretty much every weekend for about a year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's people really underestimate, therapists included, right? So this is one of the reasons I wrote my book. Um, therapists included, but the culture as a whole really tends to underestimate the difficulties of the transition. And then, like, when you are psychologically adapted for war and to be in that space, that's a very unique psychological adaptation. Like, you have to be a fucking savage,
Mm-hmm.
you know? I mean, you're like a werewolf. You are not completely human, especially if you're in any kind of combat role where, you're eating bombs or bullets or, serving those out. And so it's just a totally different mindset. And the place you let yourself go, you have to let yourself go to a pretty savage, place to have that kind of attitude to do the job and just to survive. But when you get back from that and just to imagine, like, I mean, a lot of guard or reserve guys, right? That they can come home and, like, they're doing that one day, and like 3 weeks later they can be back at their civilian job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's absolutely insane.
Major Dick Winters did a really good job writing his book, Beyond Band of Brothers. And, I absolutely love that book. I probably read it 2 or 3 times. And I watched Band of Brothers, the TV series. At one point I was watching it probably twice a month. But in his book, he always knew which people he could call upon, and he called them he called them the killers. Like, they are people who were technically um and tactically proficient and knew how to kill the enemy. Everybody in there was a killer, but these were your killers. These were
Yeah.
your savages.
Right.
And Bill Garnier, who was one of the main characters in Band of Brothers, he was one of them. Uh, and people don't understand what it's like to have to go and hunt the enemy. The psychological aspect of where you have to bring yourself to get into that mindset, and
Yeah.
then how to dial it back whenever you're no longer in that environment. And it's not an easy process.
It's not. Yeah. And frankly, like, and another thing I talk about in my book, and kind of one of the things I emphasize in my book, is that um, I actually don't really believe it is possible without a really significant intervention like it. And that I think one of the things that's reflected in the Odyssey is that Odysseus leaves Troy, and the first thing he does is he raids the innocent people at Ismarus. They kill all
Hmm.
the men. They behave as if they're still at war. And they go in, they pick a fight with Polyphemus, So it's just like the series of actions that show a warrior who's very much still in the mindset for war. He's not adapted for the task of healing or transforming, and that he goes through a really severe and long-term ordeal that ultimately changes him. And the biggest part of that being 7 years grieving on Calypso's island. Like, that is the place of initiation where he's transformed from a warrior into a veteran who's capable of, facing what he's feeling,
Having
and
compassion and empathy and all of that.
yeah, that he has to be changed from the inside out. It's not like like, we don't just have like a switch we flip and be like, I guess I'll be a civilian today, or I guess I'll just put aside the way of being that helped me survive in combat for however long.
Do you feel like, part of the culture of, just the military in general and, command and everything like that kind of ingrains that it's like a switch that you flip like that? Like, you're here, you're doing the thing. Okay, now you're done. Now, go be normal and go adapt, go adjust, and deal with it. I mean, is that something that you think is a culture, stay tough and don't address it, bury it deep and deal with it however you need to? But I mean, how do you think that that's something we can change from within the positions that we're in outside of the military, and then also, from within? Like, what are some of the changes we can make there?
Well, I first of all, I'd say, like, yeah, I do think the culture is a big part of it. I mean, Matt, I'd love to hear what you think on that too. But for me, when I think about, military culture, I think that the culture that we have is pretty necessary to like our task, which is war
Mhm.
fighting. You know,
Right.
that like you need your NCOs, especially, you know, you need these soldiers in these units, especially the leaders of those units, to have a persona and a way of being that sends confidence to their troops that like, hey, if we end up in the shit, we're going to come out on top, you know. um, and you really need that whole culture and that attitude to be reinforced throughout the unit. And something I'll say too is like, you know, so I in the unit that I was in, my platoon, I very much had that from our NCOs, all of which were combat veterans. They were on their second or third tour. Very much had that from my platoon sergeant. A lot of confidence in him. Uh, my platoon leader earned it. And I do have a ton of respect. I love the guy who is my platoon leader. I'd go to war with him today. But I will tell you, for like the first several months, I was terrified that that guy was in charge. And I mean, really, truly, I mean, there were times where we were on patrols, and I remember thinking, like, we're gonna die because of this guy. Like, he doesn't have the killer instinct that we need right now, you know. And I remember thinking he's gonna get us killed. Like, he's a bad tacticianer. He's not the guy we need to get us through these ordeals. And I remember thinking, like, as a lower enlisted guy or E4, I'm like, we're gonna die because this guy is not the kind of warrior we need to carry us through this right now. And so I do think it's very, very important for military leaders to embody that way of being that is, critical in combat. You need the lowest level soldier to look at his leadership and have confidence that, like, if they tell me to go do this hard thing, they're gonna have my back and they're gonna do anything to get me and take care of me and see me through this. But on the other end of it, um, I mean, Matt, wouldn't you agree with that, I guess, before we
Yes. So I would say, coming from the leadership aspect that I came in, going from, starting out as a rifleman, assistant automatic rifleman, all the way up to platoon sergeant and up. Um, as leaders, we're kind of taught just to internalize everything. We saw bad shit happen. It makes us smarter, it makes us stronger. I'm going to internalize it and I'm going to use these as lessons learned in order to train my Marines to make them better than what I was whenever I initially went into the war. And so you use it to make them more lethal, um, more capable. And but you forget about everything on the back end whenever it's time to decompress. And because as that leader, there's really no time to decompress because you're kind of, you get back from a deployment and then it's doing a workup to go to another deployment, and then it's coming back and then it's getting ready to do another workup. So you never actually truly get to decompress and actually analyze the feelings that you go through. I was a couple years ago, so there was a book, Bastards and Brothers, that was written, and that book was written about my deployment to Iraq in '05. And I did an interview with the author, and I had my company commander and my company first sergeant on that podcast interview as well. And after I published it, I reached out to my old platoon sergeant from that deployment. I was just like, hey, man, the episode's out. He's like, dude, I don't know if I can do it. And like, this is a guy, like, he'd been in almost 30 years at this point. He's like, I have internalized these feelings for almost, 20 years now. For, I think it was like 17, 18 years at the time. He's like, I don't know if I can do this. I was like, bro, give it a listen. If you can't listen to it, just turn it off. Give me a call and we'll talk. I'm here. And this is a guy that was my leader. And he got through it and he was like, that was probably one of the most cathartic experiences I had. I was finally able to let some of that out. And it's a continuous process of being able to recognize the feelings that you're going through. And then actually analyze, how can I make my life better based off of everything I went through? and then move on from that. And it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing healing process. But while you're in, it's kind of like you have to maintain that warrior mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brittany, to answer the second part of your question, I think a lot of what Matt just said is really important. Because you're kind of getting to like what can we do as therapists, or in the mental health field to help folks who have experienced these things. And for me, I think about the program that I work at the Battle Within, our Revenant Journey program, where we do group therapy with a group of veterans and first responders. And it's a powerful program that makes a huge difference, because I think it really changes things when you get a group of folks together where they are with their peers. It's not just one-on-one with a therapist where they're in secret, but they're sitting with a group of their peers and they're taking off this mask, because all of us have lived and worked in this world where we're told that, like, to belong and to be valued, you have to be a hard ass. And that if anybody sees any sign of,
Weakness.
yeah, and really like just emotional maturity, frankly, but it's interpreted as weakness.
Yeah.
If you're gonna cry, that's a sign of weakness, in the military community. But Karl Marlantes, in his book What It Is Called to Go to War, he talks about how we need to create post-war initiation processes that change the rules that we play by. And at the Battle Within, that's kind of what we're doing, is that we are having this initiation process where these guys are with a group of their peers and they're able to take off that mask and talk about how they're really feeling and how they're really doing. And something really special happens when the first guy starts to cry, because these guys are sitting in a circle and they're looking at each other and like, dude, this guy's a fucking badass motherfucker. And if he's crying and it's safe for him, maybe it's safe enough for me. And it's almost like somebody's like, just poking a hole in that mask or that persona. And it creates permission for everybody to just kind of take that mask off completely and to show, who they really are and what they've really been carrying. And all of a sudden, it's like we all now have permission to be whole human beings, and that we don't have to keep playing, this game anymore and pretending like we're all right if we're not. And so I think, frankly, when I think about what therapists could do, I think a lot of it is just appreciating that we kind of need to reinvent therapy. James Hillman, who is a veteran himself, he was a corpsman, served stateside during World War II with the severely wounded. And James Hillman said, we've got to get therapy out of the therapy room and into the world. And I think that that's kind of our task as it relates to helping veterans, is that individual therapy is great. It's important. It's necessary. We can never get rid of it. But we also have to find a way to get therapy out into the world, And I think that's kind of one of the points of my book, too, is that I wrote this for veterans because I feel like it's one way to, let these ideas and this way of being breathe, to give guys like Matt and I, a framework to understand that, like, we don't have to keep doing this. We can do it different.
I think, what you said about, talking to somebody that lived it, they understand it. That I think that's huge. And like you said, to be able to just break those walls down, like, it's okay to be vulnerable. This is humanity. One of the first mistakes that I ever made as a victim advocate, I don't do anything clinical counseling like that. The social work I do is just, I kind of guide in the right direction and outsource for, resources and things for crime victims. One of the first mistakes that I made was, I was 22, fresh out of college, thought I was going to come change the world and help people out. And I had a murder victim's surviving family member with me. And we're sitting there talking, and I made the mistake of saying, I understand. And they looked at me and they said, you don't understand. You cannot possibly understand. Have you had a family member that was killed right in front of you? And I said, no. Like, I learned a huge lesson that day. You don't understand, and I think from the social work aspect of it, and from the therapist, point of view, or that trying to be somebody to help heal when you haven't experienced something like that, is take a step back and let them guide,
Yeah.
don't try to act like you know everything, because you don't. And I think that uh a lot of veterans and stuff, like, they might finally work up the nerve to try therapy, and then they get one bad experience with their first therapist that thinks they know
Right.
everything, or
Right.
says what sounds right, and it turns them away forever.
Right.
And so I think that's huge. And I like that, pulling therapy out of the therapist room and putting it into the real world. I like that.
Yeah, I actually remember learning a very, very similar lesson. I remember my supervisor confronting me on something similar, and she's like, you shouldn't say you understand. You don't understand." And while I may have understood in my own way, or been able to relate to it, or have empathy for it, based on, like, I know in some sense kind of what that feels like. But yeah, it's like, I I couldn't understand all of her experiences and this person's circumstances and all that. And but yeah, my supervisor confronting me on that was actually a really helpful kind of, and an enlightening moment to realize that, um, we really have to appreciate how things can be unique or different for all of us. And I love something too. Something else James Hillman said. He has a really good book that I think is just essential, but it's called A Terrible Love of War. And in there, he says that most war is a failure of imagination, and things that happen in war are a failure of imagination. And that he gives all these examples of times where people say, well, we didn't imagine this would happen. We didn't expect this invasion. Like, all these things are a failure to imagine what could go wrong. And I feel like that problem applies to what happens after war too. There's a lot of failure of imagination that I think at leadership at the VA, and leadership within mental health, that there's a real failure of imagination to imagine into what it must be like for veterans to discharge and try to transition. I love Leo Jenkins' book. Former Army Ranger medic, wrote a book called On Assimilation. And I think it's just an absolute work of art. He talks about how terrible his transition out of the military was. And he says, I wrote this so you could give it to people to say, like, here, this is what this is like. This is how bad it sucks leaving the military and trying to transition. And I can't recommend that book to, therapists enough, and just the general population. And it really drives home the point that, like, if we think that we can just treat trauma and help people get better, we're sorely mistaken, because even the homecoming process can be pretty traumatic. And that we need to really imagine into veterans' problems differently, which again is kind of one of the points of my book.
So, kind of moving along, why Odysseus? What from Greek literature, mythology, one of the most, important epic poems of, history excites you? You mentioned Celtic, Viking, and even Navajo culture, and the ability to transform and leave behind the warrior centric tendencies. But why Odysseus?
So the reason that I leaned on the Odyssey was because it's the most elaborate story about a warrior's return. So I give some other examples in the book, where there's these other myths that parallel some of the key themes, right? That you have this warrior who gets stuck in this combat mode, or this really aggressive way of being. And in all those stories, there's a female figure that helps the warrior to transform.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about, like, transforming from the inside out. I call that the archetype of the warrior's return. And I've actually identified now about a dozen examples of that same exact theme, where this female figure plays the key role in helping this warrior to heal. And from the perspective of Jungian psychology, there's some really important meaning. But with the Odyssey, if you compare the Odyssey to all these other myths, this is the most elaborate story. It goes into tons of detail about where he goes and what he does and the whole entire process of homecoming. A lot of the other stories are much more basic and less detailed. And so for me, I think a lot of it was just seeing that there was a lot more opportunity to get into some of the minutia and the depth of veterans' experiences. And just like we were talking about a minute ago, that Odysseus, I think, is a great mirror for a lot of what modern day veterans experience. And so at the end of the day, while I could have written a book that focused on any of these other stories, and maybe I will one day, I think that the Odyssey just is a very rich example with a lot to look into.
So Odysseus fought in the Trojan War, and before he could return home, as we've stated before, he essentially had to purify himself, and become at peace with himself. How does he achieve this, and what are some of the few symbolic tests that are most resonant within the veteran community today?
It's a great question. Okay, so I'll just breeze through a quick summary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Odysseus leaves Troy. Him and his men go to Isthmus. They raid the town. They kill the men. They, pillage the town. They steal all their stuff, cause all this pain and suffering. They go to the land of the lotus eaters, where anyone who eats lotus forgets all about their home, their identity. They don't care where they're going or where they've been. It's very similar to, what drug or alcohol use might look like. And Odysseus is wise enough to say, we can't stay here. We got to move on. They go from there to the land of the Cyclops, where they meet Polyphemus the Cyclops. And this is the son of Poseidon. But Odysseus doesn't know that. He's really kind of ignorant about whose realm he's in. And he accuses Polyphemus of being lawless and inhuman, which is kind of interesting after all the things he's just done. That Polyphemus is the lawless and inhuman one. But when the story is describing Polyphemus, it's talking about how he lives off the land, and he's a goat herder, and he takes care of animals, and he lives off their milk and their cheese. He sounds like a very peaceful being, actually, who's just living naturally. And Odysseus picks a fight with him. He goes back to this old way of being where everything has to be it's always got to be a battle to be won, right? And so he picks a fight with Polyphemus, blinds him, which pisses off Poseidon. And that's like the one god you wouldn't want to piss off if you're having to sail home from war. But Odysseus is just ignorant and he doesn't care, right? And ignorant, and I'd say arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're really getting the sense that Odysseus has some serious character flaws after all of this. Like he's really gotten high and mighty, right? Which war can do to a person, I think. It did to me. And from there, he gets this bag of winds that could get him home. So he gets this like mythic gift, and he tries to drive himself home for 10 days. He tries to stay awake at the wheel, and he's the only one driving the ship. He won't let anyone else drive. And so he's just kind of possessed by this way of being where, it's all him all the time. Go, 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 go. No room for any kind of like diversity within his psyche. He's not a really flexible guy, very rigid, right? And that causes a breakdown. So the bag of winds gets opened by his men who are jealous of him and the way he is. And that bag of winds blows them all the way back to where they started. So all this progress is lost. From there, he ends up in the land of the Lastrygonian giants. They kill most of his men. And so his power is severely diminished, right? And there's something really important in the story, which is there's been no female figures in the story up to this point. And this is when he lands on Circe's island. This is the first female figure he meets, this goddess. And Circe confronts him. And she's the first force that has this kind of like transformative effect on him. And she's like, hey, Odysseus, if you want to get home, you've got to go to the underworld. There's just no way to get home without it. And so he descends into the underworld, where he gets instructions on how to get home. And while he's down there, he sees all these masculine figures, all these male heroes who are a lot like him. They're kind of a mirror image of himself. And these are all male figures who are suffering and who are in the predicament they're in because they were too heroic and too one-sided. And so he sees Prometheus getting his liver eaten out by a hawk on a stone, who thought he could steal the fire from the gods. He sees Sisyphus rolling this boulder up a hill, right? And then he runs into Heracles. And Heracles, which, you've got Hercules in Roman mythology, Heracles, his predecessor in Greek mythology. But Heracles says to him, like, Odysseus, like, my poor fellow, are you too living the same sorry kind of life that I was living when I was above ground? And he says, I was the son of Zeus, and even I couldn't do it. Like, I was a demigod. I'm half God, but no one can live the way you're living and get away with it. And so he's basically confronting him and saying, Odysseus, this is what you're going to end up like. You're going to end up like all of us unless you change. And so Odysseus is confronted in this really real way in the underworld where it's like he has to learn a new way of being. And it's this female figure who's showing him a new way. So with that, what eventually happens, and I'll just kind of skip ahead, but what eventually happens is that Odysseus spends 7 years on Calypso's island where he's basically has no one to fight, nowhere to run. There's no way he can get away from the pain and suffering that he's been trying to avoid. And for 7 years, he learns to get in touch with his grief. And at a certain point, Athena and the gods and goddesses see him and they're like, you know what? He's finally ready. And so it's the gods that help him to get from Calypso's island to the land of the Phaeacians, where he tells his story and he owns his identity and he grieves openly in front of all these people. And they say, like, we're going to get you home. And they're the ones that take him back to Ithaca. So in a nutshell, the really big transformative thing that occurs is that, you have this really one-sided figure, this heroic figure who is adapted for war, but he hasn't adapted to the healing process. And it's the female figures that are familiar with the inner world and navigating this realm of pain and suffering that help him adapt and learn a new way of being. And they're the ones that help him to find a new side of himself that's never lived. And that's the really critical part of all this. And I'd say that for a lot of veterans today, right, that a lot of us do run into experiences of anxiety and depression and suffering. And in my view, a lot of what we do as a culture is we try to make all that go away. Take pills, do whatever, try to numb it. Even we go to therapy to try to make it go away. There are therapies whose goal is to just eradicate suffering. And that, in my view, is kind of misguided. For me, I posted on Instagram yesterday a quote from Marcus Aurelius.
Yep.
Where he's basically saying the obstacle is the way.
Yep.
The pain and the suffering, this heartache, if we turn toward it and learn to hold it with compassion instead of pushing it away, it can transform us. It can
that
make
obstacle is your new path.
Yes, it can make us whole if we relate differently. So for me, I'm kind of turning this whole thing on its head. And when I look at the Odyssey, I see it as a roadmap to veterans recovery that is kind of countercultural and different than the way that we tend to handle things, more broadly in our culture.
So you and I have had some talks online, and I described my first experience with talking to a therapist, and I described it as an experience where I felt that I was not comfortable or able to necessarily trust the person I was speaking to. And I mean, let's be real. Whenever you're talking to a therapist, you need to feel comfortable talking to that individual. If you can't fully trust them, you're not going to get out what you want from that session. But even after trying to relate to him and seeing the books Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno, which it's much like Odysseus, where these individuals, the protagonists, are on a journey about healing. He kind of brushed it off and shut me down, didn't even approach that subject. So why do we as veterans, especially the combat vets, feel most therapists aren't necessarily suited to help us out? And if you were in that same position as a therapist, what kind of questions would you ask to help relate to the individual?
Yeah, I love this question. One of my old professors, Matthew Bennett, just released a book on this, and God, I wish I knew the name of it. I'm reading it right now, and I love the book. Um, the subtitle is "Return to Freedom and Dignity," but he's introducing a new model and a new theory of therapy. And in the book, kind of what he's saying is that we can't have a therapy that's just about the intellectual doing, that it has to have soul. It has to entertain and has to make peace with and relate to people on a soul level, and to tend to these aspects of human experience that are artistic and mythic and esoteric. That so much of human experience and so much of what humans naturally do to convey what they're feeling or thinking is through stories. So to me, if a client is bringing to me their feelings or their thoughts, or if they walk in the door and they say, I've been reading Dante's Inferno, and they want to talk about it, I will spend the whole fucking hour talking about that, because to me, that is like the ideal doorway into their soul and what's really going on with them.
I you can almost correlate Dante's Inferno with Odysseus and with the modern warrior because, much like Odysseus, Dante just got back from the Crusades. The love of his life is been taken and is in hell. And now he's having to go through the 9 levels of hell and essentially live out all his sins and purify himself in
Yeah.
order to become a normal human being again.
Yeah.
I mean,
Brilliant.
it's almost the same.
Yeah.
And then you have Paradise Lost, which that's about how Satan gets cast down from heaven. It's like the preface of the Holy Bible, but it's done really well, and it's more of a love story of Satan getting cast down and just trying to figure out what happened and figure out his new life and his new role.
Yeah. For me, these stories that have endured, right? And this is kind of a general way that we hold things within the realm of depth psychology, is that these stories that have endured like this and that have spoken so broadly to so many of us, they are powerful to us because they're touching something that is archetypal and that's
Mhm.
like universally true. It's mirroring something within our souls. And so as a therapist, if somebody brought something like this to me, I would say, "Oh man, what part of that uh, evoked the most feeling for you? I mean, what is it that touched you most deeply when you read this story, or uh, what is it about that part of the story that got you, or is there ever a time where you felt the way that Dante did there?" You know, are there times where you felt like Dante when he's going through, this ordeal? What was that like? So it's like it's the perfect opportunity. It's like it's sad because you gave this therapist this like ideal
I
opportunity.
gave him an in.
Yeah, and he didn't see it. And that's the thing. So your other question is, why do veterans often feel like their therapists, don't have what it takes to help them? And sadly, one of the things that therapists will say, one of the things therapists will say when veterans quit therapy, or when anyone quits therapy, is that, well, they're treatment resistant. This is treatment resistance. And then it's automatically, right. And it's kind of funny because in the field of psychology, we have this whole framing of like good object, bad object, right? And that like when this challenging event happens to you, do you make yourself into a good object or a bad object? In other words, like do you have to make yourself good when this uncomfortable thing happens? Or do you have to make yourself bad when this uncomfortable thing happens? And do you make the other person a good object or a bad object? And there's this really fucked up thing that happens when veterans quit therapy, which is that inevitably, most of the time, the therapists keep themselves as a good object and make the therapist or the veterans into the bad object. So it's like, well, the treatment's good, I'm good, but the veteran's treatment resistant. This is just an emotionally avoidant veteran who doesn't want to face what they're feeling. When really, I think what's actually happening in a good portion of these experiences is the veterans see like, yeah, this therapist doesn't have what I need. Like they do not have the depth that I need. They cannot take me where I want to go. They are trying to steer me into a form of treatment that's not touching the thing that I want to touch. Like there's something in my soul that is wounded. I've lost a part of myself and I want to find it. And this asshole is just wanting me to repeat stories about some fucking ambush on Route Golden Solder City. Well, you know what, guy? Yeah, that was traumatic. But at the end of the day, I'm wanting to get to the core of this grief I feel, knowing that some part of me died, and right now I just need to talk about that. I don't want to fucking talk about what happened on Route Gold. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe the two things are woven together. But I think if we don't let the patient lead, if we don't let the veteran lead, we're going to end up with like a therapy process that doesn't get us where the veteran soul is trying to take us. So for me, I'm obviously very passionate about this, right? I'm like all fired up right now.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is kind of why I wrote the book. I didn't just write it for veterans. I wrote it for veterans because I feel like, frankly, there aren't enough good therapists to take veterans where they need to go. And so I think while therapists can get a lot of veterans, a certain amount of the way down the road, and I think that therapists can help veterans to an extent, I think there's also work that veterans are going to have to do on their own. And my book was meant to be a bridge to help them do that. I'm also hoping I'm hoping that therapists will read it so they can say like, holy shit, we've been missing something. We need to better appreciate this journey that the soul goes on and the way it affects the whole person. So.
No, I
Right.
can really appreciate that. And I love those answers. Like, I think they're spot on.
With the whole thing about if you have a veteran sitting in front of you in your office, like they're not resistant. They're there because they want to get better. They
Right.
want to help
showed up.
themselves. Yeah. So, I mean, with that, how can we encourage veterans, like as therapists, as people just in their lives, how can we encourage in our buddies, how can we encourage them to not only go to therapy, but if they did have an adverse, experience like Matt did, or, how do we encourage them to try again? How do we have them keep trying one until it fits? I mean, in victim advocacy, I always use the dating analogy. Like your first therapist may not be the one for you. You may have to, go on a couple dates with a couple different ones. But how do we keep veterans, especially, how do we help them to keep trying?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think one of the things that I want to do is not just through my book, but through like the social media stuff that I'm doing, and maybe at some point I'll like publish like a free little, how to make the most of therapy thing for veterans, because I think this is a great question. And it's something that we need to talk more about. But I think that it's normal for people in general, not just veterans, to have a bad experience in therapy and be like, well, I'm not going back. That's the end of it, right? Well, in psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is like, that's my bread and butter, that's my wheelhouse, that's what I do. And psychodynamic therapy, by the way, is like a therapy that appreciates the underlying dynamics in the psyche, that there are like different aspects of the self that are having these different experiences that are influencing our perceptions and our sense of self and how we view ourselves in relationship with the world. And it's also appreciating the role of different psychological defenses and complexes and all these things that might influence us. So, but in a psychodynamic psychotherapy, we appreciate that healing happens within the context of the relationship, and that there's this field between the therapist and the patient. And that a lot of times the stuff that is coming up between the therapist and the patient can have deeper meaning. And so for us, like for me, I always educate my new clients to let them know, hey, if I step on your toes, if it feels like I'm not listening, if it feels like I missed the point or dropped the ball, or if you are close to getting into your emotions and I took you away from it, I want you to tell me.
I love that.
I want you to confront me. I want you to say to me, hey, dude, like I was on the verge of tears and then you got all heady and took us off in the wrong direction. Like, let me know how I failed you so that then I can say, like, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to. And, I guess I wasn't attuned the way that I should have been. And I'm wondering if this is something that's happened to you before. Have there been other times when you were in need emotionally and it felt like someone dropped the ball on you? And so it creates this opportunity for a corrective experience. So I'd say for veterans or for anybody who's out there that feels like their therapist has failed them, tell the therapist and let them have a shot to take responsibility and then to like talk about what happened and to see if there can be a repair. And if a therapist is worth a shit, they will be able to make this repair with you if you're holding it in a healthy way, right? You've got to be willing to make the repair too. But if the therapist is not able to make a successful repair, or if they're going to put it on you or whatever, you might look for a different therapist and say, if one of the, psychodynamic therapists, this is like a huge part of our training. So if you find a psychodynamic psychotherapist, there's a really good chance they can do this with you. But not all therapists are trained to do that. And so some therapists, might not, this might be just a total shock to them that they've never been prepared for. So yeah, I think that there's a huge need for veterans just to understand, like, you can't just quit therapy at the first sign that it wasn't right. You gotta be willing to like work it out a little bit. And at the same time, like if everything in you is saying this is not a fit, you can walk away with no
Mm-hmm.
shame at all. So it's like dating, right? I mean, I tell people this when I talk to new clients and stuff. Finding a therapist is like dating. Go on 4 or 5 dates. Go see 4 or 5 therapists, interview them and feel like, does this feel like a fit or not? But if everything in you says like, oh, this is not a fit, don't just, you could just tell the therapist that, like, hey, at the end of the day, I'm just not feeling like this is the connection I'm looking for.
I
Yeah.
remember my first experience with that therapist, which it put a bad taste in my mouth, and it was like, it was the whole introduction phase, and I just told him who I was, kind of told him my life, quick biography of my life story. And then he was like, well, I can definitely help you out. I've helped Navy SEALs, I've helped SF guys, I've helped, and he's just going down a laundry list of, different branches and specialties of service members that he's helped. And it's just like, hey, bro, I'm none of that. And I don't, I have friends in those communities, but I don't care. Like, I'm here to get help. I don't need to know your resume of all these different types of people you helped. What can you do for
Yeah.
me?
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
1% trying to relate to another person.
Yeah.
I
And
think,
go
go
on.
ahead, Matt.
No, go on.
I think a big thing too, for veterans and just, and, first responders too, is that kind of going back to the culture, this concept that like, if I'm going to therapy, something's wrong with me. Like, I don't want to seem like there's something wrong with me. I want to feel like I'm in control and I'm not broken, and people that are broken go to therapy. And I think that's a misconception that I don't know how we tackle it, but you know, starting somewhere, and especially, with your book, that's a good place to start. Um, like, you don't have to be broken and falling apart at the seams before you go to therapy. By that time, you're doing worse damage to yourself.
Yeah.
Therapy is for most people. So I really like what you've said about, dating. I use that same one. Like, try a different one. It's not the end of the world if this one therapist is a butthole and they suck at their job, or
Right.
it's just not a good fit. Your personalities aren't compatible with each other, or their approach is a little bit weird, makes you uncomfortable. Just go to a different one.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for saying that. Yeah, I mean, for me, at the end of the day, I tend to think of suffering and the work of therapy differently than most therapists do. But the way that I tend to hold things and view things is pretty consistent with how other Jungian oriented therapists or depth oriented therapists see things. And for us, and something that Jung wrote and said was that, you said that in the majority of his cases, the conscious mind is stuck. It's come to this standstill where it's not adapted for the problems that it faces. And that ultimately, when the ego's stuck, the solution always comes from the unconscious. And that, it just makes sense, right? That if the conscious mind has hit this wall and can't go any further with the way of being that it's cultivated, the solution always has to come from this part of us that has never lived. It's always got to come from the unconscious. And that these experiences are always going to be, full of suffering. And so for me, suffering is just a natural experience of the individuation process. Suffering is also an inherent aspect of suffering trauma, that when certain defenses like hyperarousal or dissociation, get activated or stuck, we're going to have anxiety. And for me, we're not broken, we're not weak. Our brains and our bodies and our nervous systems and our souls are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. These are normal responses to trauma, and these are normal experiences that arise when we end up in a transitional crisis. So for me, there's zero judgment, there's zero criticism, not an ounce of it, because this is what the brain, the body, the soul, the nervous system, this is what they do. And they are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And so I think that, as veterans, I think that a big healthy change that we should all work toward is to start to see suffering as a voice of the soul, to appreciate it as sacred, that if we are suffering, we are carrying the ultimate burden that is inherent with the role that we are in. If you are a warrior and you do your job, you are going to end up suffering, and that it is an honorable task in my mind to create space for that suffering. That this is the warrior's task to tend to the wounds in his soul, and that we should hold that as a sacred thing and a sacred duty, and that we should cultivate a community as veterans and as warriors that makes space for that suffering and treats it as sacred, to honor it, not as a wound or brokenness. And like when I see certain veterans organizations or brands or whatever say things like shoot your trauma in the face, and I'm like, you guys, we gotta stop that. We gotta stop treating it like we're at war with it, and we gotta kill it off. Like that's what gets us here. We've got to treat this as something sacred that can transform us. We've got to start treating it as something that is welcome, because it's here, it's a part of us. There's no running away from it. We can't defeat it in the conventional sense. You can't drop a mortar on it. You can't shoot this thing. You have to listen to it and let yourself be changed by it. That is ultimately kind of the paradoxical road to healing. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, my kind of dream scenario would be to see where in basic training, the average private is getting some instruction or is being influenced by drill instructors or drill sergeants who are conveying that suffering is an inherent part of this work. If you are fortunate enough to be in battle one day, to do all these things that we train to do, and unfortunate enough at the same time, that if you end up being able to fulfill your tasks as a warrior, it's going to hurt. And that when that happens, we will not leave you behind. We are going to have each other's backs, that when these traumas occur, it will change us. But we are going to go through the process of transformation and find the other side of it so we can keep going. But that's my ultimate fantasy, I think.
No, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to us about this stuff. Like I said in the introduction, this is an important subject to me. You know, as I continue on my journey through transitioning out of the military, and it's been 2 years, but it's still a road that
Yeah.
we're all on. And you know, I would love to do another episode with you. You know, there's so many more questions I would like to ask and just put out there, and just do this again.
Sure,
It's
I'd be happy to, and I could take a few more minutes if you want to ask any more questions tonight, or we could table it for next time. It's up to you.
I I'd say let's table it for next time. That way we
Okay.
have more questions to ask.
Okay.
I'd love to set something up again when we're all available to talk again.
Sure. Yeah,
But
likewise. I really enjoyed it. And I mean, for me, I really appreciate you guys making space for this. And I felt the kinship just through Instagram. And it's great for me to have, to know that there's other veterans who care as much about this stuff as I do. So I appreciate you and everything you've done and continue to do.
no, I appreciate that. I do what I can, and I just try and help people where I can, just like you do the same. You know, I think it's a natural form, an honorable form of living life. You know, if we're not helping each other, then why are we here?
Yeah, agree.
So to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of this. If you are, feeling down and out, like, get this book. It's a worthwhile read. It's definitely going to help set you on a path. Whenever I'm feeling down, when I'm going through something, I do pick up this book, and it kind of sets me right. Go for a run, start lifting. You know, there's a natural form of, you know, energy increase, and just it helps your brain, get yourself right. You know, burn out that aggression, put your aggression into something. Don't suffer in silence, and don't suffer alone. But I hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, we're gonna be on a extended break, and but if when we get Adam back on, these episodes will go out immediately. So this episode's gonna come out, this coming Friday. Um, but I appreciate you again, Adam. Brittany, thank you for coming on, and we will talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks, Matt and Brittany.
Thank you all.